Welcome to A Seeking Heart with Allison Gingras, distributed through Breadbox Media. I'm joined today by my birds and Kimberly Cook. Kimberly Cook's new book, Motherhood Redeemed: How Radical Feminism Betrayed Maternal Love, is out from Tan Publishing. Kim, thank you for joining me today.
Thanks so much for having me today, Allison.
Kim and I met in real life a few years ago, and I'm so grateful that the Lord connected us and I get to call you friend. Kim, tell us a little bit about Motherhood Redeemed.
Well, the book is a parallel of my story, my testimony story of being drawn into radical feminism and really losing my Catholic faith of baptism and origin, and then how I came to discover all the lies of radical feminism, and really with that healing journey came back to the Catholic faith and embraced that. And then so I wanted to tell my story, and then also I wanted to really share with people the history of feminism, especially in this country, and how damaging it's been for women, especially when it comes to women wanting to embrace motherhood and family life. And so that is basically the inspiration behind the book. And as feminism becomes more and more prominent in our culture, and a lot of people don't really understand the history of feminism or the true definition or meaning of feminism, I think it's easy to get wrapped up into that lie, to get sucked into the same path that I did, and or to believe that it's compatible with a Catholic faith, a Catholic understanding, Catholic teaching, and to be slowly drawn down that path. And as well, on the other hand, even if that's not the case, just being able to refute and argue the case against feminism is really important in this day and age. So, for all of those reasons, I felt it was necessary to write this book at this time.
Well, I know very little. I'm going to be very honest about feminism. I remember reading in college back in the 80s the Betty Friedan, is that her name,
Mhm.
book?
Mhm.
I think I was needed to read it for some class I was taking. I don't think I took very much away from it. I think that part of me lived it without really realizing what I had um, kind of talked kind of was like drawn into, like what I was being kind of lied to about. You do mention that book in your book. Can you tell a little bit about why?
Sure. So Betty Friedan wrote that book, The Feminine Mystique, in the early 60s. And what happened was it really had this bombshell effect on the suburban housewife. Now, to go back to the 50s, right before that, there were definitely problems that needed to be corrected. No question about that. There was this idea that the 50s housewife with the picket fence and the manicured yard had the perfect life, and her waist was supposed to be, so many inches around, and she was supposed to show up when her husband got home at the door with pearls on and, looking perfect with makeup and high heels and pearls, and all however many kids behaving like angels in the background. The house was spotless, dinner was on the table.
Wow, you're describing my home.
And so there was this painted image in media and commercials and magazines and everything of this perfect 50s housewife. And sure enough, that led to a lot of despair among women of that generation. And we know that there was a high use of alcohol among housewives at the time, a lot of sleeping pills being prescribed, um, a lot of antidepressants, things like that. And so there was definitely a cultural problem with women feeling that they had to fit into this box, which any mother knows is impossible to fit into in all of those areas and still maintain peace and happiness and all of the things spiritually that you need. And so these women were existing a lot of times on these uppers, downers, just to get them through. And then they weren't being honest, having an honest relationship with their spouse. So, because of that pressure, there were a lot of marriages that children were seeing that were on shaky grounds. And then, of course, the 60s and 70s rejected marriage altogether for free love. And they didn't want what their parents had, which they saw this facade of perfection, but underneath it all, everything was falling apart. So there were definitely cultural problems that needed to be addressed. And, the balance of power, if you will, in the household, like, the woman's responsible for everything with the children, everything with the food, everything with the cleaning. And the man comes home from a hard day's of work and puts his feet up and smokes his pipe by the fireplace, drinking a brandy and reads his newspaper and relaxes for the rest of the night while mom's wrangling kids in the bath into bed and all that kind of stuff. So I need to put that there first in place, because Betty Friedan's book came on the cusp of that and was kind of speaking to these women that were either in that situation or had been raised seeing mothers struggle to meet that perfection. And I think that her book hit this chord with the housewife. And her whole point was, that there has to be something more than this. This can't be all there is. I, deserve more. I'm worth more. I can give more. I have more value than this. This can't be all there is to life. And um so I think a lot of women latched onto that. And then, of course, she called being stuck at home with children, raising children, a comfortable concentration camp. That was one of the things that she said about being a stay-at-home mom. So not only did she strike this chord, but she also made women feel like they had been lied to, cheated. Not that there needed to be some things changed, but that even being home, being that housewife was such a lie, and there could be no joy and happiness in that vocation. And the whole thing, the baby needed to be thrown out with the bathwater, basically, was the point of her book. So, with that, a lot of what she encouraged was mothers to not tell their girls, okay, go straight from high school to getting married anymore or looking for a husband. That was kind of the thought beforehand. Women can't go into these careers that are male dominated, like sciences or math or things like that. These are unfeminine fields. So instead, just become a secretary or a nurse or a teacher, or do something that won't really get in the way of getting married. And so the end goal was all about getting married and family. So this Betty Friedan's book really changed that to the point of, no, mothers were saying, get your degree, go to college, go live on your own, experience life, date a bunch of different people. And then eventually, if that's what you're called to is marriage, then after you've kind of sowed all your wild oats and figured out all these things, then get married. So that book drastically changed our culture for the first time in that way.
And I definitely grew up with a dad who kind of saw it the other way. I remember talking about going to college. There had been no woman in my family. My mother had started. I lied. There was one woman in our family who had gone to college and graduated. She was a teacher. She never married. And so that was the only one out of a history of people in my family. My mom started, she didn't finish, she got married. And so when I started talking about college, my father was like, "Why do you need that? Just become an executive secretary and then you'll be pregnant and barefoot before you know it. You don't have to worry about these things." And it was interesting to, to kind of go against that, but yet I wanted both. And I knew I could have both.
Mhm.
I knew I could go to college. I got my master's degree. I was a paralegal. I was able to have my dreams, follow everything that I had felt called to do. And also, I got my master's degree with two little kids at home, going to school in the middle of the night on the internet. It was like, this
Mhm.
works for me. There's this way of balance But what I didn't know at that point, because I hadn't yet come to know the faith, was what you talk about John Paul II's 1995 letter to women. Can you tell us a little bit about how all that connects? And then, we start to see God's design for us.
Sure. And I think that a lot of people often do ask that, well, what is the balance then? What is the balance? And that's something that women in the 50s didn't, at least socially in society, if you look at the reflection of the sitcoms that were on and things in magazines and reflections of the culture, certainly didn't understand the balance there. And then the generation that followed, the 60s and 70s, obviously went in the complete opposite direction and didn't understand the balance there, with rejecting marriage altogether and family life and just having this free love mentality. So I think that when John Paul came to the papacy, it was really ripe for needing to hear that truth, especially about marriage and the family, and especially about women's place, because I think there was a lot of confusion for women about, where do we fit in? How do I have all these gifts and talents and this desire to do things outside of the home, but also this strong desire to be in the home, to have children, to have family life? How could God have put all of these desires in my heart and not have wanted me to pursue them? And so John Paul really educated us in the fact that it isn't necessarily one way or the other. It's not that you have to choose, okay, are you going to be single and have a career, or are you going to stay home and raise children? And that's not the way that God made women. And because he gave us these gifts of multitasking, of being able to take on so much, and to be able to have this scope of compassion for all people, especially our family and our children, but also extending beyond that to the larger community and to the world. Because God did put that in a special way into the hearts of women, which he called what's been termed the feminine genius, that makes it clear, we follow what God's put in our hearts, and we follow the proper hierarchy from that, and we learn what we're capable of and how we're capable of doing that. So the important thing with John Paul was always that there is this hierarchy. If you are called to the vocation of marriage and you're blessed with children in your home, then there is this you have this responsibility, obviously, to them, to their education, to their well-being, to love them well, and to give and to make your home a place of peace and a sanctuary, and a place where the children feel that they're loved and welcomed, and that it's a place that they can grow and thrive, and not that everyone's like a bunch of ships passing in the night and nobody's really there for them and there's no stability. So there is a responsibility to create that in the home, and the mom, as basically the heart of the home, really bears a lot of that responsibility. But on the other hand, it doesn't mean that that has to be all that she ever does, and that if those needs are met, like you said in your own example, it worked for you to be getting your master's degree online. So you didn't even have to leave the house, and at different hours, when either the kids were sleeping or your husband was taking over or
Right.
whatever else was
Right.
happening.
Mhm.
So I think that John Paul allowed women to see that you can make this work, and it doesn't have to be all or nothing. You don't have to sacrifice your children, and you don't have to sacrifice all these other desires and gifts that God put in your heart, whether that means taking a few years off when the children are babies and then going back to something, or whether it means getting your master's degree, like you said, online at odd hours, or whether it means whatever. But the fact is that we all have gifts to share, and with our immediate community of our family and beyond.
I love how you kind of made that connection that God put those in our hearts. They're, and He tells us in the scriptures He delights in giving us the desires of our hearts. So why would He put that there, like you said? And then, and there's so many, and I love that there's no right or wrong way of living this out, of living out this promise. And that's one of the things I took from talking today with Kimberly Cook. Her book is Motherhood Redeemed from TN Publishing. This is one of the things I took from your book, Kimberly, is that there's when we open our hearts to what God wants for us. I was the person, you talk about looking for that loophole, right? In the human vitae. Like I was looking for that. Like my husband and I, we had been married for a while. We were looking for all the loopholes to live the way we wanted to live, but also to be good Catholics, like to be faithful. I shouldn't say good Catholics. I like the word faithful Catholics. So it's a much better word. Like practicing our faith according to the way it was taught and not the way I wanted it to be. So how did you, if you don't mind sharing, how did you make that balance in your own life?
Yeah, so I know a lot of people will ask that as well for me because they say, okay, right now we're pregnant with number 5 and our kids are mostly young and I just wrote a book and I'm doing a podcast, the same kind of things. And luckily with technology being as it is these days, you can do so much online at home without ever leaving, all like we're doing right now this podcast. You can do it right in your home and you turn on the computer and there it is. It's not like you're going to a studio, you're getting the kids a babysitter and you're gone for hours or something like that. And so with technology, that's one of the beautiful things about modern
Great.
technology is that we can reach each other right through the phone or the computer or whatever else. And for me, thankfully, with the balance, my husband is totally on board, which I think makes a huge difference and is really necessary when spouses are on board and the family's supportive. I can't imagine doing anything with a family that was resisting mom taking on some kind of a task. And so, really, the family for me has definitely been my biggest cheerleaders and advocates. My husband really encouraged me to write this book. I had been wanting to write it for so long and it was in my heart and I had talked about it and he really said you have a story to tell and it's a good one and people need to hear it and we will do whatever we have to make time for you to write this because I believe in this. And if I didn't have his motivation, I don't know if I would have had enough motivation to write it on my own because I'm thinking of, oh my gosh, all the hours it's going to take and then writing and editing and all that goes with it. I'm like, you really have to feel passionately about a book to write one.
Oh my gosh, yes. They're way harder than they look on the shelf.
Yes. So I mean that is what I would say is just having that partnership and that those cheerleaders because your family, your spouse, they have to be cheering you on and making the time for you. If they're kicking and screaming, it's going to be miserable and it's not. I mean, how am I supposed to tell people about balancing motherhood when I'm telling my own family, get lost so I can write this book and tell people about balancing motherhood? It's got to be something that you feel like God's opening the doors to, especially through the words of your spouse and your family.
That made me think of when I first started to come back to the church and I started to do Bible study and my kids were little at the time, I had 2 boys, I hadn't yet adopted Faithy, and I would be, sitting with my, Bible and my book study books, and I would be, kind of like trying to get into the study, and then the boys would come over and I would like freak out and be like, "Can't you see I'm trying to study my faith right now?" And I'm like, "Okay, I'm totally missing the point." So when you said that, I started to see that connection of, missing the point. But that story aside, Kimberly, we're talking today with Kimberly Cook, Motherhood Redeemed, Radical Feminism, Betrayed Maternal Love. If I'm a person who sees this cover, sees this book, one of the things I miss about bookstores uh, is picking up a book and leafing through it. If I'm like looking at the cover of your book, what is it you hope that the reader will be drawn to, what the reader will get from spending some time in Motherhood Redeemed?
Well, I definitely hope that the idea that motherhood is a supreme good for women will come through. And that's something that was really lost on me throughout those years that I was pursuing radical feminism. One of the biggest beliefs was that motherhood was the worst thing that could happen to a woman. It stunted her growth in every single way. And again, all those horrible images of like a parasite being in your body and not only taking all of your nutrients and everything else like that and making it hard to do anything and ruining your body. But beyond that, anything that you've worked for, your career, your education, any advancements that you had hoped for in life are just destroyed by this child, and that was really what came through to me, that there's nothing good that can come out of motherhood. And so it's really something that if it's a desire that you can't shake for whatever reason, like it's just a biological thing, because at that point I didn't really have faith. So if you feel like you have this biological clock that you just can't turn off, fine, wait till you've done all of the things that you want to do and you've pursued all the things that you want to pursue and gotten your education and secured your spot in the world. And then if you feel like you need to have one or maybe two children, fine. And then as soon as possible, return back to that career. And I really saw children as a burden and something that was in the way. And the only reason that you have them is because you do have this biological clock that, some women can't shake, but then just get that out of the way and move on with your life. And we see that all the time when we look around us, women that are living that out and not embracing the joy of motherhood, the joy of what was truly put in our heart again by God, that passion to not only have a child, but to raise and nurture and love that child and to be loved in return. All those things are missing when you don't allow that to penetrate your heart and when you don't see the fruits of the vocation for what it truly is. And so those lies are really what I hope that women can recognize early enough. And I've had, sadly, so many women that are past the age of childbearing that have come to me in tears saying, I have multiple degrees and PhDs and so many accolades hanging on my wall. And I had listened to so many women in my life had lied to me. My mother, my grandmother, aunts said, don't do what we did, go do this, go do that, pursue this, don't marry him, don't, pushing them, kind of living through them in a way. And
Yeah.
now it's too late for them to have children. They've missed their chance in so many ways. They've missed so much of their life. And now they're so lonely and reminiscing on all that they did not take part in. And there's just immense sadness in their life now and that they're dealing with. And that, I guess that's what I hope, is that I can reach some of these women before they would get to the point of needing to reflect back in life before it's too late. I'm thankful that the Lord, got me in time so that I could still live a life of truth, and that I found John Paul's teachings and I was, moved enough by them and recognized that truth enough to turn away. And I pray that other women can have that same conversion through hearing the truth.
Well, the one part I'd like to just kind of circle back to just for a minute, for those who may listen, who may have felt like they're part of that people, the women who missed that call or didn't hear it soon enough, and they're maybe feeling that loneliness and that pain. I want to talk just a quick moment about John Paul's teaching on spiritual motherhood. That, God says in the scriptures, "I see I make all things new," and so nothing is ever finite in the love of God. And so that if somebody is that woman who feels like I missed it, the God gives you so many ways of redeeming that motherhood, the name of your book, Motherhood Redeemed, through your spiritual motherhood, that there are so many young women and women, people out there who could use a loving It's Saint Francis d'Assisi. I just want to just stop for a second here. It's Saint Francis d'Assisi's Assisi's feast day. And can I tell you, Kimberly, every time you're talking, I mute, and these birds do nothing. They don't say a word. They don't make a peep. And the second I turn on my microphone and I start to talk, they're like driving me crazy. Anyway, we're going to have to find out a new plan for the next podcast for those who listen to A Seeking Heart regularly. I'm sorry. And to you, Kimberly, I'm very sorry for interrupting, but I had to laugh that today is his St. Francis's feast day. And here I have my animal friends. So,
Right, you should say it was planned.
oh, yeah, totally. Yeah, they're just trying to share in the
The
conversation.
soundtrack for Francis.
Can you share a little bit about spiritual motherhood just real quickly before we wrap up?
Absolutely. Yeah. So that is a beautiful thing to point out. And of course, spiritual motherhood is something that we all have to understand because it is more of a reality, I think, than physical motherhood for us because all women share in spiritual motherhood, whether they are able to physically have children or called to physically have children. When we look at nuns and sisters in religious life, they are not called to a physical motherhood, but very much so a spiritual motherhood. And the same thing with single women, and the same thing with women that are not able to have physical children of their own or just choose adoption. Those are all forms of spiritual motherhood. But even the woman who does have physical children, it would be ridiculous to say that she also doesn't have a spiritual motherhood for those children. I mean, I think if all I had to do was physically, carry and bear my children and maybe nurse them or whatever, and then a year after I'm done with them, that's the end of my motherhood career with that child, okay, that wasn't so bad. See you later. Good luck in the world. I mean, what is our role for the rest of their lives? The rest of our child's life, we spiritually mother them. We constantly pray for them, for their protection, for their good, for everything. Um, we are we spend a lot more time spiritually mothering our children than physically mothering them. And hopefully, our children will live a long life, and the time that they're actually under our roof to be physically mothered is a lot shorter than the time that they're not under our roof and being spiritually mothered. So, what I realize is there's this connection between all women in all vocations. And it's this very strong sense of spiritual motherhood where we are caring and praying and concerned for the good, the truth, goodness, and beauty of all people that God brings into our home. It could be a biological child, it could be a child by way of adoption. It could just be a friend or somebody in need. Or if you're a religious sister, there's going to be people that come to you and God brings them there for a reason. And it's because they are in need of that spiritual motherhood, or even, with Padre Pio, we see so clearly that spiritual fatherhood. He's one of the best saints to show this spiritual fatherhood where people are just drawn to him in need of that spiritual father. And he willingly and excitedly takes on that task. I think you're still on mute.
All right, my poor editor, my poor podcast editor is going to have a little bit more work to do. Anyway, picking back up. Just a little interesting Godsident moment before we went live. I was testing out my microphone and my headphones, and the two YouTube videos I chose to listen to without realizing it both talked about Padre Pio. He is my spiritual dad. He
Mhm.
shares my actual dad's birthday, and I had a very difficult relationship with my father. I went to a retreat. I touched my crucifix on one of his gloves, and I just kind of like I always wear. He's always with me, and I just feel that very strong spiritual. Our spiritual mothers and fathers can be
Mhm.
here. They can be in heaven. They can be the biological ones who have passed on, but also I love our saintly, our blessed mother, my spiritual mama, and Padre Pio. So just interesting that you mentioned him, because I've kind of felt him with us this whole conversation. So, Kimberly, as we wind down, we're talking again today with Kimberly Cook, her new book, Motherhood Redeemed: How Radical Feminism Betrayed Maternal Love. How can we, one, purchase the book, and two, how can women who want to continue this conversation, continue learning more about this topic, kind of follow what you do? Because what you do is amazing, by the way.
Thank you. So first of all, you can go to Tan Books to purchase it. You can go to Amazon to purchase the book. You can go to my website to find out more, which is just kimberlycook.me. And you can listen to my podcast. You can find out more about what I've written on feminism and other topics like that. So that's a great way. And then I should say, Allison, that my last podcast that I just released was on a couple who Padre Pio was their matchmaker.
No way.
Yeah,
Oh,
so
that's
you would
crazy.
love it. And they were very close with him throughout his life. And she talks about becoming a spiritual daughter, but in person. She was in person, spiritual daughter. Very,
Wow.
very powerful story.
Well, that's why I love him. Him and I actually shared the world for about 3 months. He died the September of the year I was born. So I have this closeness to him because we shared the same air.
That's amazing.
I love that our saints aren't just these people who lived thousands of years ago or even hundreds of years ago, but that they lived in our time, which is amazing. Kim, thank you so much for making your time with me today. I really enjoyed, as always, our conversations.
Thank you so much, Allison. Always a lot of fun to be with you.
You have been listening to A Seeking Heart with Allison Gingras, distributed through Breadbox Media. God bless.